Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I remember the exact moment the world broke. It was Tuesday, October 10th, around 4:15 in the afternoon, and I was sitting in the dispatch chair at the Hobbs County Emergency Communications Center in Laramie, Wyoming. My name's Dave McAllister. I'm a former volunteer firefighter turned 911 operator. Not the most glamorous job, but it paid well, and it kept me close to the people I cared about. Wyoming wasn't the kind of place where you expected the world to end. But that day, the phone lines lit up like the sky before a storm, and we all knew this wasn't a drill. The first calls were chaotic. Something's wrong at the university. My neighbor's trying to bite me. There's blood everywhere, please, just send someone. Within 20 minutes, the line to the University of Wyoming Medical Center was jammed solid. The police scanner was nothing but a stream of Code 3 responses and panicked calls for backup. I dispatched 3 units before my supervisor, Terry, tapped me on the shoulder. "Dave," she said, eyes wide, hand trembling slightly. "We've got units refusing to respond. They're saying the infected are attacking responders." The term hit my ears strangely. Infected. Not shooters, not protesters, not even riot. This was something different. And that's when the first video came in. Someone uploaded footage from outside the dorms at McWhinney Hall. It showed a young man, probably in his 20s, stumbling forward, his face pale and expression slack, blood crusted around his mouth and nose. A campus security officer approached him, calm at first, hands raised. You could see him saying something, probably trying to de-escalate. The infected man lunged. In one horrible motion, he tore into the officer's neck. Blood sprayed onto the concrete like paint from a broken hose. The screams in the background were very real. We lost control of Laramie in less than 4 hours. My wife, Jen, and our daughter Ellie lived just west of town in a ranch-style house we'd inherited from her parents. When the panic set in, I begged Terry to let me go. She gave me one look, handed me the backup radio, and told me to run. I barely made it to my truck before I saw the first true swarm. They came from the direction of the high school. Dozens, maybe hundreds, of infected staggering forward like drunks in a winter storm. Their eyes were glassy, their movements uncoordinated. But once they heard or saw movement, it was like a switch flipped. They locked in. I floored it west, my Tacoma bouncing off the dirt road's uneven edge as I radioed Jen. She answered on the second ring, whispering. "There's someone outside the window," she said. "He's banging on the glass." "Get Ellie. Go to the basement. Take the emergency bag. Do not open the door for anyone." "But now, Jen." She hung up. I didn't know if I'd make it back in time. The highway out of Laramie was already choked with vehicles, many abandoned. I took side roads, cutting across the old ranch trails and irrigation paths. Just past Breezefield Airport, I saw it. Flames, black smoke, and a crowd of infected pouring into the fields. My house was a half-mile away. I cut the lights and coasted in. I found Jen and Ellie huddled in the basement. My wife had already barricaded the doors with the metal filing cabinet and wedged a crowbar into the stairwell. Ellie had her stuffed owl clutched in both arms, eyes wide with terror but silent. Smart girl. She always had Jen's sense of timing. I hugged them tight and told them what I knew. It wasn't just Laramie. Cheyenne was silent. Denver had gone dark. The federal channels were still broadcasting emergency tones, but there were no voices, no instructions. Just a loop of shelter in place. We waited in that basement for 3 days. On the 4th day, something fell from the sky. It was just before sunrise. We'd taken turns keeping watch through the narrow window slits in the kitchen. That morning, I was outside refueling the generator when I heard it. A low, sonic rumble, like an F-16 punching through the clouds, but deeper, more guttural. The sky split open in a streak of red and gold, and something Someone fell out of it. He crashed into the eastern prairie just past the buttes, sending up a mushroom cloud of dirt and flame. I heard the shockwave rattle through the trees half a second later. Then, silence. I couldn't ignore it. I had to see what it was. I left Jen and Ellie with the 9mm, my backup Baofeng UV-5R radio, and the flare gun. Told them I'd be back by noon. Loaded my Mossberg 590 into the truck, along with 2 extra boxes of shells, and drove east. The impact crater was massive, at least 50 feet across and 20 deep. Dirt still smouldered along the rim. In the center stood a man. He was tall, well over 6 feet, barefoot. His blue suit was scorched but unmistakable. Red cape shredded at the hem. The golden S symbol on his chest gleamed despite the smoke. He looked confused. He looked human. And when he turned to face me, I froze. Because I knew who he was. We all did. I raised my hands instinctively, the shotgun slung across my back. "You okay?" I called. He squinted, then tilted his head like a dog hearing a strange sound. "Where am I?" "Wyoming, near Laramie." He frowned. "This isn't Krypton." "No, sir, it's Earth." He took a deep breath and staggered forward. For a second, I thought he was going to fall, but then he steadied himself. I remember the light, a beacon, then the breach. "You fell out of the sky." "Not fell," he corrected. "I was sent, I think. There was a war. My memory." He looked behind me, eyes narrowing. A groan, then another. I turned. 4 of them, infected, clumsy, approaching from the edge of the field. I reached for the shotgun, but Superman, if that's who he really was, raised a hand. "I'll handle this." He moved like a blur. In an instant, he was on them. But what happened next wasn't heroic. It was horrific. He hit them too hard. One of the infected exploded like a balloon. Another was tossed over 200 feet and crumpled like paper. The remaining 2 were incinerated by a sudden blast of heat from his eyes. Then, silence. Superman stood over the remains, breathing hard. "I didn't mean to," he whispered. "Are you okay?" "No," he said, more to himself than me. "Something's wrong. I can feel the sun, but I'm not at full strength, and this world, it's hurting." He looked at me again. "I need your help." We drove back to the house together. Jen didn't believe me until she saw him step through the door. Ellie just stared in awe. He crouched beside her, looked her in the eye, and asked her name. She whispered it, and he smiled, warm and kind. He stayed with us that night. He ate a little, though food didn't seem to matter much to him. And when the sun rose, he stood outside on the roof, letting it bathe him in light. We learned his name, Kal-El. He remembered fragments, a council in crisis, a message encoded into a starship. The coordinates of Earth entered as a last resort, but the Earth he expected was gone. Instead, he found a dying world, choking on its own panic. We spent the next few days moving from house to house, helping who we could. Superman wasn't invincible, at least not yet. He had to rest. He could be hurt. I saw him bleed once when an infected got too close with a rebar rod. But he healed fast, hours instead of days. By the end of the week, we weren't just surviving, we were building something. A small haven, reinforced fencing, solar-powered radio, a clean well and basic medicine, and hope. But hope has a cost. Because on the 9th day, we picked up a distress signal. Not just any call for help. This was military, an encrypted channel from F.E. Warren Air Force Base in Cheyenne. The infected had overrun most of the base, but a handful of personnel remained alive in the missile control center, trapped beneath hundreds of feet of reinforced concrete. They were sitting on top of 65 Minuteman III ICBMs, and they weren't sure how long the safeties would hold. We all looked at Superman. He didn't hesitate, not for a breath, not for a heartbeat. He turned away from the radio, walked to the edge of the porch, and stared southeast toward Cheyenne, some 50 miles out. The The smoke in the sky already hinted at what was waiting. His cape, what was left of it, fluttered weakly in the wind. I followed him outside. "We're not ready," I said quietly. "We don't know what's waiting at the base. No working satellite imagery, no drone coverage, just a distress signal." "I know," he replied, arms folded tightly across his chest. "But if those missiles go off, it's not just Cheyenne. The launch codes are still active. Those birds are tethered to the grid. That many weapons, one corrupted command signal, one last failsafe failure, and we'll be dealing with more than infected. Nuclear winter on top of the outbreak." He turned toward me and for the first time since he arrived, looked almost unsure. "I can't do this alone." "You won't," I said, gripping the old steel of my Mossberg. "But we'll need a plan." We left the compound just after nightfall, with Jen and Ellie watching from the porch as we pulled away. Superman, Cal, as he now preferred, rode in the bed of the Tacoma. He said it helped him conserve energy for when he'd need it most. Even he admitted this world was draining him in strange, untraceable ways. Gravity was familiar, but the atmosphere wasn't quite right for his physiology. Not yet. He was gaining strength, but slowly. The road to Cheyenne was littered with wreckage. We passed the remains of convoys and emergency vehicles, sometimes spotting headlights still flickering from drained batteries. Dozens of them had tried to get out. Judging from the claw marks and blood streaks, none of them made it far. We travelled west on Y210, the Happy Jack Road, skirting the southern edge of the Medicine Bow Route National Forest. It was the only route not completely gridlocked. We approached the outer defence line of F.E. Warren Air Force Base at 4 o'clock, and we saw hell. The chain-link perimeter fencing was twisted and ripped, as though a storm had slammed through. Watchtowers leaned at odd angles. There were shell casings everywhere, 223, .308, even a few .50 caliber brass. Bodies too, dozens, maybe hundreds, scattered in the dead grass around the gate. Some were uniformed, others not. A Humvee burned slowly near a concrete barrier, its turret still aimed at the empty sky. We parked a quarter-mile out and went the rest of the way on foot. I carried my shotgun and a backup Glock 19. Cal carried nothing. He didn't need to. As we moved into the base, we could hear the distant sound of infected. Not the mindless moans people associate with movies. These were real, living humans twisted into something savage. Their breathing was ragged, their movements twitchy, as if their muscles no longer followed normal signals. Every so often we'd hear them scream, sharp and feral. They were inside. We reached the operations block just before dawn. The missile control center, the hardened silo facility, was beneath the main admin building, roughly 120 feet underground. Access was limited to secure personnel, and the only way in was through the armored elevator in the command wing. The entire north end of the building was gone, collapsed, fire blasted. Cal studied the twisted metal and concrete slab as I checked the bodies nearby. No signs of recent struggle. Whatever had happened here took place days ago. Suddenly, his eyes narrowed. "They're alive," he said. 12, maybe 13, deep below. They've barricaded a bulkhead, but they're running out of air. I stared at him. "You can hear that?" "I can hear the ventilation system trying to push stale air, and I can hear them, breathing." He stepped toward the rubble and placed his hand against the ground. "I can get to them." "Wait, we still don't know what's between here and there. The base layout's complicated. They built this place to survive a nuclear blast. I don't need hallways." With a sudden surge, Cal drove his fist into the ground like a jackhammer, sending a shockwave through the concrete. Then, slowly but steadily, he began boring downward, melting through reinforced flooring with precision bursts of heat vision, clearing rubble with raw strength. Within 10 minutes, he was gone. I waited on the surface, my shotgun ready, watching the horizon. A low fog had started to roll across the base, thick and unnatural. I didn't like it. Something about it felt too uniform, like it was following us. And then I saw them. They came from the east, beyond the hangars, Hundreds of them. The infected, drawn to the sound or the scent, or maybe just the disturbance in the soil, moving as one, faster than they had any right to. I radioed down, "Cal, we've got a problem. You've got maybe 5 minutes." There was no reply. I fell back to the burned Humvee and set up a defensive position. My Mossberg was loaded with buckshot. Great for close quarters, but I knew it wouldn't last. I fired a flare straight into the sky, hoping it might distract or redirect them. It didn't. The first wave hit the edge of the courtyard. I fired once, then again. The infected dropped in waves, but more came forward, climbing over their own fallen like ants over a carcass. I reloaded quickly, my hands shaking, the heat from the barrel searing through my gloves. Then, just when I was about to fall back further, the ground split open behind me. Cal emerged in a blaze of steam and light, holding a steel hatch door in one arm and supporting a half-conscious Air Force officer in the other. Behind him, 2 more survivors scrambled out, their uniforms stained and torn. "Move!" Cal shouted. "They're right behind you." I pulled back as Cal slammed the ground with his open palm, sending a seismic shockwave that cracked the tarmac and split the infected column. Dozens were thrown backward into the air, crashing into buildings and barricades. But it wasn't enough. They just kept coming. We fell back together, moving toward the southern perimeter. I kept the surviving personnel moving in a tight line, while Cal ran interference. At one point, he took a steel parking sign and used it like a sword, slicing through a wall of infected with such force that the pole bent in half. He tossed it aside and switched to bare hands, breaking bone and throwing bodies with precision. We reached the old hangar near the southern fence line, where I'd stashed a secondary vehicle, an armoured National Guard LMTV that I'd hotwired the week before. I helped the survivors in while Cal sealed the gate with a slab of concrete torn from a nearby wall. As I climbed into the driver's seat, one of the airmen, Lieutenant Mark Kelso, grabbed my shoulder. "We had a failsafe," he said, eyes wide. "A countermeasure. If the control center was compromised, there's a dead man switch built into the warhead matrix. It's wired to a biometric trigger. If it doesn't detect our command imprint every 12 hours, he didn't need to finish the sentence. The missiles would launch. We needed to go back. Cal insisted we couldn't just leave it to chance. The command room was compromised, but the uplink, if still active, could be rerouted. There was a hardened relay station just outside Cheyenne, buried beneath a mountain of granite at what used to be the NORAD backup site, Echo Point. It was dark, frozen in standby mode since 2008, but if we could power it, we could intercept the failsafe and neutralize it permanently. That gave us one shot at overriding the missile control logic and cutting the launch trigger from the chain of command. The old NORAD Echo Point facility was carved into the southern face of Table Mountain, a remote and forgotten relic from a bygone era when the Cold War hung over every military protocol. It had once functioned as a secondary command node in the Strategic Command's continuity of government plan, one of several buried bunkers designed to survive nuclear detonation and maintain communications if the main grid was taken offline. Most people in Wyoming didn't even know it existed. That's how they wanted it. Getting there was the hard part. We took the National Guard LMTV along the southern bypass out of Cheyenne, turning west past the ravaged outskirts of Granite Canyon. The air was heavy with soot, and the sky, already tinged with autumn grey, had deepened to a dull, lifeless amber. The firestorms that had passed through the area had turned whole pine forests into skeletal ruins. The only sounds that followed us were the groan of the truck's engine and the occasional crackle of residual heat rising from charred ground. Cal rode up top again, crouched low, surveying the terrain like a watchtower on legs. The further we got from the base, the less human the world looked. The infected moved differently out here, less frantic, more organized. It was subtle at first, just small clusters seen from a distance, avoiding sunlight, keeping to the tree lines. But as we got closer to the mountain, it became obvious. Something was drawing them west. We weren't the only ones headed to Echo Point. By midday, We reached the service trail that led up towards the outer gate. The road wasn't even marked on most maps. It wound steeply into the granite folds of Table Mountain, surrounded on all sides by sheer rock and dense pine. About halfway up, we came to a gatehouse, crushed inward, as if something enormous had broken it like paper. Cal jumped down and inspected the damage. It wasn't explosives, he said. It's like the metal was twisted from the inside out, not cut, not melted, almost like pressure bending the molecular structure. I didn't know what to make of that, but I knew it wasn't human, maybe not even infected. Whatever had done this had strength that rivaled Cal's. The idea that he might not be the only thing from beyond Earth now walking among us sent a chill through me that the mountain wind couldn't match. The last quarter mile was on foot. We left the truck behind after the path narrowed into a maintenance tunnel paved with metal grating and lined with rusted utility lights. Most had long since gone dead. Every few feet, we passed cracked concrete columns and scattered debris, remnants of emergency gear, rusted oxygen tanks, chemical spill kits, and even a few discarded firearms. The smell inside was a blend of mildew, engine oil, and something organic that I didn't want to identify. The entrance to Echo Point was a pair of armoured steel blast doors set into the face of the mountain. They stood at least 12 feet high and were emblazoned with the faded logo of the Air Force Space Command. Above them, the stone still bore the barely legible letters, Echo OPS CMD Redundancy Node 3. To the side, a biometric panel blinked dimly in standby mode, just barely alive off internal backup power. Lieutenant Kelso, one of the survivors from F.E. Warren, stepped forward. His uniform was ragged, but his mind was sharp. He knelt and accessed a weathered terminal beside the door, using a field-issued diagnostic tablet to manually handshake with the system. After a few minutes of swearing under his breath, he got it to respond. The biometric scan was still functional, barely. It took his palm. The system whirred, and then the doors groaned open by 6 inches before stopping abruptly, frozen on rusted hydraulics. Cal stepped forward without a word and pushed. The mountain itself seemed to resist, but the metal bent slowly under the force of his hands until the gap widened enough for us to squeeze through. Inside, it was pitch black. We activated headlamps and stepped into the silence. The inside of Echo Point was like walking into a steel skeleton. Cold corridors branched in multiple directions, each lined with data conduits, old fiber optics, and scorched bulkheads. The walls were covered in blackened scorch marks, signs of an internal fire or electrical surge. The air was stagnant, but breathable. The relay core was buried 3 floors below, beneath the old data fusion center. According to Kelso, if we could reach it and reconnect power through the internal diesel generators, we might be able to force a manual relay override to sever F.E. Warren's warhead command loop. That would render the launch mechanism inert, but everything depended on whether the physical system still functioned. As we descended, Cal's posture changed. He slowed. His head tilted slightly, like he was hearing something again. "There's movement," he murmured. "Not just infected." "Define not just." He didn't answer. When we reached the central junction hub, we found the power relay caged behind a reinforced hatch. The room beyond was partially collapsed, but accessible. Kelso and I worked quickly, cycling through the ignition protocols for the generators. 2 of the 3 units were dead from corrosion, but the 3rd still had viable diesel and a cold start override switch. It roared to life, lights flickering overhead. The moment the power surged back through the relay grid, a new sound filled the facility, a low-frequency tone, mechanical but rhythmic, pulsing through the air like sonar. Cal stiffened. "That's not a power hum," he said. He was right. Something else was waking up. Kelso stared at his diagnostic screen, horrified. "That's an uplink. Something's pinging back. From orbit." "What do you mean, orbit?" "I mean, we just opened a handshake channel to a satellite system that's not in any of our logs. Not US military, not Russian. It's foreign. No known signature, and it's answering us." Cal moved toward the comm terminal. I can feel it, he said under his breath, like static behind my eyes. Then the lights cut out. For a moment, everything was black again. My breath caught in my throat. Kelso cursed. Cal didn't move. Then a soft red glow illuminated the corridor. Emergency lighting, flickering from hidden strips along the floor. And standing at the far end of the hallway was a figure. Humanoid. Tall, clad in armor that shimmered with a dark metallic sheen, like it was absorbing the light instead of reflecting it. Its eyes glowed pale blue, and across its chest, a strange symbol pulsed, circular, geometric, unlike any language I'd seen before. Cal stepped forward, body tense. "I know that design," he said. "That's not Earth tech. That's not even Kryptonian. That's something older." The figure raised its hand. We were thrown backward by an invisible force. Compressed air and gravity folding together in a single concussive blast. My back slammed against the wall, knocking the wind out of me. Kelso hit a pipe and dropped. Cal, though, stood his ground. The thing spoke, not in words, but through vibrations that rattled in our skulls, a message encoded in sound. World failsafe initiated, non-host specimens detected, compliance required. Cal's jaw clenched. It's an autonomous system, not a person, a sentinel, maybe left behind by whoever built it. Maybe it was dormant until our signal woke it. What does it want? To finish what the infection started. Cal charged. The hallway lit up in arcs of kinetic energy as the sentinel activated some kind of gravitational shield. The air warped around its form, twisting like a lens. Cal slammed into it, and both went tumbling through the corridor in a blur of movement. Metal shrieked, sparks flew. Their collision tore through Echo Point's sublevel like a wrecking ball in a tin can. They smashed through bulkheads and conduits, the walls splitting with hairline fractures as emergency lights flickered under the strain. Every time Cal struck the sentinel, a pulse of electromagnetic distortion rolled through the structure, causing control panels to glitch and lights to blink out. It wasn't just brute strength the thing possessed. It manipulated force itself. It moved with precision, anticipating Cal's attacks as if it had studied him. And maybe it had. I ducked into cover beside the emergency comms rack as a section of ceiling gave way, spewing concrete dust and twisted rebar into the hall. Kelso crouched beside the backup battery bank, trying to shield the control console. We had disabled the uplink, killed the failsafe trigger, and shut down the external relay. But this was no longer about protocols or missile silos. This was about survival, and about stopping whatever had come here through the stars in response to the chaos we'd unleashed on ourselves. Cal crashed through the corridor past us, trailing a streak of heat from his damaged suit. The left sleeve was torn completely off, revealing skin that shimmered faintly with solar absorption, but was now bruised and darkened. His breathing was heavy, jaw clenched, eyes locked on the sentinel, who stood calmly amidst the destruction. There wasn't malice in its stance or rage. It moved like an autonomous system enacting a calculated task. To it, Cal wasn't a savior. He was a variable to be neutralized. The sentinel's chest glowed as the ring-shaped symbol there pulsed rhythmically. With a sound like the bending of steel underwater, it unleashed a directed gravity wave. Cal was caught mid-step and hurled backward, slamming through the inner doors to the generator chamber. The impact shook the entire sublevel. Alarms triggered in a chorus of shrieking tones, and the building's structural integrity monitoring systems began to flash red across every remaining display. "Structure compromised," a monotone system voice warned over the intercom. "Support beams failing in level 3. Evacuate immediately." But none of us were leaving. We couldn't. Kelso pulled himself up and slid a data key into the local diagnostic port, trying to salvage any remaining control over the base's systems. "There's a secondary containment door. If I can isolate the power junctions, I can collapse this whole floor and bury that thing. But Cal's got to be clear of the blast radius." I nodded. "You prep the charges. I'll get him." He hesitated, then handed me the key and gave a firm nod before returning to the console. I ran toward the wreckage of the generator chamber, shotgun slung and flashlight shaking in my left hand. The room was pitch black, except for the pulsing glow of residual energy flickering across the damaged walls. Cal was on one knee, near the far wall, blood on his brow, one eye swelling. His cape was torn away completely now, and one boot was half melted from a near hit. Despite it all, he looked calm, determined, and more human than I had ever seen him. I helped him to his feet. "You're bleeding," I said. He wiped the blood with the back of his hand and stared down the hall. "Not for long," he muttered, then paused. "There's more. I can feel it. That thing, it's not the only one." I wanted to ask what he meant, but there wasn't time. We had maybe 90 seconds before Kelso sealed the floor. Cal nodded once, placed his hand on my shoulder, and then disappeared in a sonic blur, back toward the main chamber where the sentinel still stood. What followed wasn't a fight. It was a calculated execution of force. Cal struck from above, hammering the sentinel with a shoulder tackle that knocked it clean off its feet. Before it could recover, he gripped its armored frame and flew straight upward, slamming it into the steel ceiling with enough force to punch through 2 layers of support. The sentinel lashed out with a graviton burst, but Cal countered, eyes burning, and unleashed a focused beam of heat vision directly into the glowing core at its center. The effect was immediate. The energy signature pulsed violently, the armor buckled, and the entire suit began to collapse inward on itself. The sentinel flailed once, then went limp. A split second later, it detonated. The blast wave didn't just destroy the hallway, it unraveled it. The walls bent and peeled outward like a soda can caught in a furnace. Pressure smashed against my eardrums as I dove behind the junction panel. The floor groaned beneath me. Cal dropped beside me a heartbeat later, scorched and exhausted, his suit flickering with what little energy remained in its alien threads. Kelso's voice came through the comms, distorted but clear. "Charges armed, 5 seconds." Cal scooped me up like I weighed nothing, and the next thing I remember was the sky. We emerged from the side of the mountain in a roar of light and fire. The Echo Point sublevel detonated behind us in a plume of shattered granite and molten steel, collapsing inward into itself. The entire face of the mountain rippled and caved, sealing the structure and everything inside it beneath several thousand tons of rock. The noise echoed for miles across the basin. We landed hard on the edge of the trail where we'd left the LMTV, coughing and battered. Cal dropped to one knee, breathing shallow, eyes closed. I reached for my radio. "Echo Point is sealed. The sentinel's gone." There was a long pause, and then Jen's voice came back, tight, strained but alive. "Copy. The compound's still holding. No movement near us." I closed my eyes and let myself breathe. The next 48 hours were a blur. We returned to the outpost and rebuilt what we could. The survivors from F.E. Warren helped reinforce the walls, and Kelso began repurposing parts from our old solar radios to scan for any other foreign signals. For a while, it seemed like we might actually see peace, but something had shifted in Cal. He kept watch from the roof, silent most nights, gazing into the dark horizon like he was waiting for a storm we couldn't see. Then, 2 days after Echo Point collapsed, it came. A fireball streaked from the sky just before dawn, descending east of Medicine Bow Ridge. But it wasn't a crash. It slowed, deliberately, and landed somewhere in the Badlands, leaving behind a column of blue light that pulsed like a lighthouse in the fog. Cal didn't wait. He came down the stairs, looked at me, and said, "They're here." "Who?" I asked. "Whoever sent the sentinels. The infection wasn't accidental. It was seeded. This world didn't just stumble into apocalypse. It was targeted." He told us everything he'd been remembering in fragments, about the galactic protocols, the ancient civilizations that once waged war across star systems, and the enforcement mechanisms left behind on isolated planets. Earth had somehow tripped one of those alarms, whether from nuclear proliferation climate destabilization, or sheer viral chaos. It had reached the threshold, and now the cleanup crew had arrived. "What do we do?" I asked. "We make a stand," Cal replied. "Here, now, before they decide this planet isn't worth saving." We didn't have spacecraft or orbital defenses. We had a reinforced ranch, 2 diesel generators, salvaged military gear, and a half-recovered Superman. But we also had something else. People, survivors, families with nothing left but each other. They came from the hills, from the valleys, from the ruins of cities. Word had spread that there was safety here, that something, someone, was fighting back. By the end of the 3rd day, there were over 200 of us. Engineers, medics, mechanics, ex-soldiers, and farmers. We built trenches, dug into the earth, reinforced what little we had with sandbags and steel. Someone mounted a 7.62 mm coaxial from an old striker to the roof of the barn. It wasn't pretty, but it was defiance. Cal stood at the center of it all, no longer a stranger from the sky. He was one of us now, battered, bleeding, and standing tall. We knew they were coming, and when they did, we'd be ready. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.